Welcome to our edition of the CEO series. Our guest today is Ashirvad Lobo, author and learning and development specialist at Air Arabia. Our topic is Full of Life, Surviving During the COVID Period, his latest book. Ashirvad is a performance-based training professional reputable for developing human capital value for global corporate firms. He's a co-author of the globally acclaimed book Full of Life and works as a learning and development executive. He has been repeatedly ranked as the top 100 global training and development minds for optimizing people metrics through management consulting, scaling, skill building, training and development programs consistent with business strategy and performance goals. He has more certification than I would care to read through, but he's a licensed LLP practitioner and he's pursuing his PCC qualification from the ICF. For the non-informed, that's the International Coaching Federation. So Ashirvad, thank you so much for being our guest today.
Thanks, Ron. Thanks for having me. I can't say I'm humbled after that introduction, but thank you. Thanks for having me here. Glad to have this.
It's good to see you again. It's been a while. So let's talk about learning and development, your new book, and all those kinds of things for the next 45 minutes or so. Mm-hmm. The airline industry, you have presided over major disruptions, and we were talking earlier, the hotel industry as well. So what are some key learning points that you've kind of observed as you've gone through this major transformation and really trying to reimagining what this is going to look like going forward?
Sure. I mean, I can't speak on behalf of the company officially, but definitely I can talk to you about some of the observations I've had in the year and a half roughly that I've spent in this industry. So I think some of the key aspects, and we look at them point by point. The first key aspect that I've seen is leadership. I mean, I know it may sound, repetitive that to say leadership makes the difference, but you can really
it does.
In this time of crisis. There are companies that are on this whole scale from being completely bankrupt to companies that are confident that they will come out of this much stronger than even before. And I think we're on this end of the scale as of now. And the key difference I can see really is the leadership team. And if you go down into some specifics, it's probably the agility that the leadership team brings in, which I see here is a massive difference. Their ability to quickly adopt to changes, meet almost daily, and look at what needs to change and change that almost overnight is one key difference in this tough time for the industry.
You mentioned agility. A friend of mine, CEO for a major hospital here in the region, told me that was one of the things he noticed about workers. Some workers stepped up to the top and they were barking orders, took charge kind of. And the people who were, in a lot of cases, were anointed leaders, big titles, they were hesitant. Yeah. So that ties back into that agility, being able to comfortably, without all the facts, make a decision. Is that what you were referencing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're saying you hear the word all the time, right? Unprecedented times. Yes. So in such times, your traditional models and all the tried and tested research suddenly goes away because no one can tell you what to do. And the information is really, today's information is as good as yesterday. It's useless because tomorrow is a new day. And with this lack of information, being able to make decisions and having the confidence to do so, is something that stood out in terms of how can you be agile. And also, Ron, I think it's the whole business model that stands out as well, because some companies can be like elephants, right? Hard to move. But if your organization is designed in a way that it can move with the times, then I think that also stands out really for us.
Yeah, I like the metaphor of the elephant or the cheetah. The cheetah is able to move back and forth like that. So that's a great metaphor. So your book, Full of Life, yes. How did that come about? I mean, what kind of kicked that in to say, you know what, I need to put something out as it relates to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I wrote it together with my co-author, Hans Hollings, who I used to work with when I first moved here in the UAE. So he was my boss, so to say. He was the partner of the firm, and I worked there as a consultant. And we sort of stayed along, even though I moved back to corporate and moved away from consulting and the training side of things. And really, a book led me to write a book. So I read a book while I was traveling called "You Must Write a Book," and I must say it worked. It did make me want to write a book, and I did that in about 2 years' time. Yeah.
Okay, 2 years time. Wow, that was a while. So, how did the title come about? I mean, you guys were collaborating on writing this book, and I know a lot of people in our space are kicking around. A lot of people are writing books, different motivations, full of life. How did it come down to that? From the thought of coming down to that title?
Absolutely. I think it was an evolution because 2 years of ideation, research, and it evolved actually surprisingly from writing about executive presence, because that's something I used to teach top leaders about. And we said, there's a gap in the market in terms of people who are teaching this and are writing about it. There are a few good authors on it. And then when we started ideating, doing some research, it somehow moved from executive presence to happiness. And then we said, okay, but there's lots written about happiness. So what can we do, which is based on actually our life experiences, Hans and mine together, and based on research, because as trainers, we have had the opportunity, for me, for example, in the few years of my life, to meet tens of thousands of people. Hans, in even more years of his life, has met thousands of people. So that's almost secondary research when you're interacting face to face with so many people for so long. So from executive presence to happiness to a place where we said, we see engagement in people really low, even before COVID, right? And you can look at, used to work for great places to work, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and
that's when we met.
yeah, exactly. So since you've seen the whole lack of or disengagement pandemic, which existed even before the COVID pandemic. So that's really where this came from. To say how can we make people at work and even people in life full of life. We live, but we just barely live, most of us. So that's the evolution from.
Okay. So you mentioned executive presence. Mm-hmm. So for people in our space, we know what that is. To the non-leadership focused people on the call, what is executive presence? How do you define as executive presence?
Sure. So there's lots of ways to define it. I think the one simple definition that stays with me is, what do people say about you as a leader or as a person once you've left the room? Right. So while you're there, you might see a lot, but once you left the room, what impression? Exactly. What impression do you leave behind? And there are so many famous examples. You can look at Steve Jobs when he launched the Mac and some of the other products, right? The presence that he brought in. There's Oprah Winfrey. There's so many people that once you've been in a room with them, you can feel these sort of goose pimples, and you feel great and so on. Simple. So that's the simplest way for me to define it.
Okay. So in other words, could that equate also with branding who you are? When someone sees you coming, right away they see an individual who can get it done, they see an individual who's full of it, or they make all these assumptions. Is that an accurate way to kind of break it down a little further?
Yeah, if you want to dive into it, that's what we get into. In fact, in the trainings, we even use the same models that marketing organizations used to market the companies, right?
Yeah.
To say, what's your vision? What's your mission? What do you stand for? And how do you communicate that? So either you can consciously brand it, or you're going to be a brand anyway. So do you manage it, or do you just leave it, be? That's really the only choice to make when you go about life.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I think what you just said was a treasure trove statement, because so many people don't realize that you have to concentrate, the same as a product has to concentrate on moving your brand. So that came down into the second area of happiness. So happiness is all over the place. As you know, Dubai, we have a Department of Happiness. I did some work for a client and I did a happiness kind of presentation. What's happiness about? Is that individual, or how could a corporate entity guide the happiness quotient inside of an organization?
Sure. So I think, Ron, I'd like to use, going ahead, the word fulfillment instead of happiness, and maybe it's, potato, or tomato. Really, when we dug into the book, right, we saw, like you said, happiness could be all over the place. So how do you make this something that people can relate to? I love the definition. If you Google the word fulfillment, it tells you feeling great about yourself because you're able to use all your skills and capabilities in everything that you do. Right. Okay. So it ties in a lot more into the corporate world and cuts across even outside the corporate world. And therefore, we called it Full of Life. So we talk about being fulfilled and feeling fulfilled in everything that you do. So to answer your question, in the context of fulfillment, I think what we spoke about and we realized was there were 4 key aspects to this. One was to start with something called a reboot, and we'll talk about that a while from now, hopefully. But the main 3 aspects we felt, which were even a little more than happiness, was you could feel happy for a short time, but it's not lasting. But fulfillment is a lot more lasting. And then there were 3 areas, which was knowing who you are, and that's the self-awareness aspect of it. Knowing what you want in life, so your goals, your aspirations, your vision, and so on. And finally, looking at how do you get there. And we realized, I think these 3 were the pieces of the puzzle that, if brought together, can really lead to fulfillment, leading to what we call to loving what you do, and then going to doing what you love to do.
So that 3-step model is what you describe in your book. You go through a lot more detail.
That's right.
In taking someone through that process.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. That's what we take people through. And we actually, in April, when this happened, right, we said, what more can we do in this time to give back to people? Because lots of people around the world are really suffering because of this pandemic. And what's the most relevant part of our book that can actually help people in these tough times? So if you link back to the title from where we spoke about surviving during COVID, that's actually just a catchphrase. If you're full of life, you're not surviving, you're thriving during COVID. So I think the first aspect of our book is really most relevant, Ron, which is called Reboot Yourself. Mm-hmm. So what we did when we had more time, because of business not being to the level that it's at, both for me and Hans, we sat down at our homes, created a home studio, and actually created a 2-hour learning module based on the book, which can help people reboot their mindset. Okay. And this, I think, is what we felt is most relevant during these times of COVID. And whenever we go on into interactions like this, socially or at events, virtual events, we give away this module at no cost, with no conditions attached. It's not buy one and then you need some others, which you see sometimes.
Yeah, the hook. Yeah. So we'll find a way because you and I were discussing how we were going to let our audience in on that. So for the people that are listening in, we will find a way for you to possibly get access to that. One of the other key points that I've kind of followed over a period of time, and I've done a lot of leadership development, as you know, was the key point of self-awareness. In your book, you reference self-awareness, which so many people struggle with. And how can a person become more self-aware? Which means admitting that maybe I'm not all I presenting myself to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a constant struggle. So I think the short answer to that is that it's really a journey, right? Okay. The moment you think you've made it, probably self-awareness is the biggest learning need then for you, because there's always something that you can improve on. There's always some new aspects of your behavior that others might see in an interaction, and you can continuously become more aware. In the context of our book, Ron, this is covered in part 2, which is Who Are You? Where we really spend, we walk our readers through the whole process of improving their self-awareness. And I like to, call our book a coaching book, which means it's like a companion with you. It's got questions that will provoke you to actually become more self-aware. So if you allow me, I can, we can go through it step by step. In terms of what's the basic way to build self-awareness, what's an advanced way, and what's the expert way. Of course, more details are in the book, and in the future, we hope to create some more e-learning on each parts of the book, so that this is available for people as well, and they're able to apply the concepts. Otherwise, books can sometimes seem very theoretical, and then how do I really apply that in my context, in my life, is what we look at. So self-awareness, Ron, at a basic level, I love the concept, and I first learned it, I think, in my own coaching certification. So when I started 2 years ago, and I did the coaching certification from Alpha Stars, the master coaches, as they say, right, were this gentleman and this lady called Sat and Siri, and they are also yogis. So they bring in this aspect of yoga, along with, of course, all the standard ICF practices. And the level and the way they brought that out, I realized that having spent 12 years working, it was still a journey for me. And I think the key coaching tool that stood out for me, which is available for all our listeners, and they can even Google it, for example, is the Wheel of Life. I'm sure you may be familiar with this, where you really ask yourself, what are the 7 or 8 things that are important to me? And most people struggle with saying 7 or 8. Really, there should be that many, because we become really singularly focused. So in today's COVID times, for example, the singular focus is, how do I survive? How do I remain financially viable? What's going to happen next, right? But when you look at a whole spread and there are so many areas that can be important to me, that really builds awareness of how can I improve the balance in my life. So I think that's the basic level of self-awareness. And the advanced level, and there's an expert level as well.
Okay. So as you were walking through those steps, is that part of the 3 model?
It is, yeah. It's the first part of the model, which is understanding who you are. That's the first part of the model. And within this, we cover these 3 aspects, the basics of Wheel of Life, and we look at an advanced aspect of awareness and an expert level aspect of awareness.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I've gone through that Wheel of Life long time ago, in my first iteration of sitting on the other side and someone was walking us through. I found it very, very helpful. But I've always been kind of a self-awareness person. After a call, I'll say what worked, what didn't work, what can I do better? After a speech, what worked, what didn't work. So it's constantly kind of, as you said, a journey, which kind of ties into that. So what role can an organization play in helping people to either become more self-aware or to become more of a full of life concept through the 3 model? What kind of leadership team, and specifically now, they need that to put something in place as they welcome people back?
That's true. So what I understand from your question is, what can organizations do to help people be more full of life? And even especially for the leadership team, how can they cascade sort of this mindset within them and then throughout the organization? Is that right, Ron?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think we look at it 2 pieces. We'll split it into 2, right? The first is, what can organizations do to support people in tough times? And I've seen that, at least in this time that I've spent with my organization, there are a few things you can do, right? One is leadership training. Now leaders are really occupied with managing the crisis, but in managing the crisis and the day-to-day, there's a trap. It's possible that they might deviate from the right leadership behaviors, the right way to manage, the right way to inspire people, the way to communicate with your employees. So I think it starts from the top. That's what organizations can do, to provide and make time for leadership training, which then can flow into employee training and even building internal capabilities. Because the biggest thing, and in such tough times, it's tough to send people out for an MBA or do a fancy external program. So how can we use our own in-house leaders so they feel engaged? It's not just about managing crisis. There is a crisis, but it's also about inspiring, motivating, and also continuously learning yourself, which can help you stay positive or stay in the right mindset instead of just being worried and concerned about business, about your own job, which is what most people experience during this time, the tough times that we're going through.
Well, you use the term leadership development training, and I'm thinking, I'm putting myself back in an organization.
Yeah.
And the CEO says, we're going to go through leadership development training next week. My eyes would go, oh God, no, not again. What would you say to an executive like me who would say, oh, geez, I don't feel like going through this again? What's the strategic statement for what am I going to get out of this?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Ron, right? Especially if that executive has been really successful, his eyes are really going to roll, right? So coming into an organization that has been profitable quarter on quarter and year on year for so many years and has grown by leaps and bounds, we've got a group of really successful leaders. And then the moment you say, let's do leadership development, they say, oh, what are you going to teach me that's going to be different than what has been, so far taught. So I think the key is in the way you communicate this, right? The communication from our perspective is not, here are the latest theories to make you better. It's about how can we become more cohesive? How can we work together? How can we learn from each other? It's like in the best MBAs, more than learning from the professor and the theory, you often learn from your peers. And your peers give you the most learning. So the way that we position this is, let's connect, let's get together. Just an example, what we did actually as an execution, we didn't do the classic 2 days in the classroom. Of course, there's COVID, so you can't even think of such things. We did a series of 3 or 4 webinars. We got external speakers for an hour, hour and a half. We ran one internally as well. And the topics were all relevant to what's exactly happening in the leader's life today. So we had very high engagement, very positive feedback coming in, and people are actually asking for more, So I think that's really the key. Communication, addressing the needs that or the challenges that they are going through at this time, and making it short and crisp, so that it's relevant and they don't have to spend a whole day, and they could even do it on their desks while they go through this webinar.
Yeah, that's a key point that you make, because a friend of mine, as I said, I think I mentioned earlier about him, he told me that he's keeping a diary of every day, what happened, what worked, what didn't work, and he makes notes of these. And he plans to take that into a development stage for his leaders, post-virus. But talking about team dynamics, one of the things that keeps popping up, and I remember this because I did some work for a major pharmaceutical firm years ago, and the topic we covered was leadership blind spots. Yeah. When I figure so that ties into kind of self-awareness, that I may not be as great as I think I am. Can you kind of walk us through, your thoughts on blind spots? And this is kind of sink back into the, topic you mentioned around self-awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest blind spot, at least linking back to the book, is a lack of understanding of values and living your values. So that's really the advanced level concept, Ron, that we cover in self-awareness. So if you ask someone, what do you do? They usually have a quick question, right? They have a quick response. I work here and I do this and so on and so forth.
My title is here.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. But the moment you ask someone, even over a dinner or networking event, what are your top 3 values, right? They're going to say, oh, what's going on? What do you mean? What are my values? And yet all of the person you're asking has values. They have values and they're living by them, but not aware about them. And there are moments when they feel frustrated, when they feel not so good about themselves. And those are moments when their values are taken for a ride. They're not able to live those values. So either someone's trampled all over their values and they have to live with it, or they themselves don't have the strength or courage to live their values. So, and this often can be a big blind spot for leaders. What are my values? What do I stand for? Do my values align with my organization's values? And can I bring these values to work in all of what I do?
Yeah. I had back during 2008 financial calamity in the US, and I lived there at that time. And there was a priest that told a story about setting up a group of people, senior executives who had lost their jobs.
Yeah.
And they would meet one night a week at his church, and they would discuss who they were, what they were about, jobs and all these kind of things. And one of the key points that he walked away from that they could not adjust to not having that title as executive vice president of this, of senior vice president, of CEO of this, because now they were just stripped of all of that and they didn't know themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Right. And that's such a great example or such a great analogy that we often associate and what we begin to value are really these titles or materialistic things, right? Things that our association is not with our inner values of what do you, so we ask this question a few times when you're coaching, what do you really value, right? Because when you initially ask what do you value, it comes to be often money, titles, position, power, and so on. But when you really dig down deeper, and that's why it's an advanced concept, when you are on self-awareness, to really pick and know what your values are and be able to live them in every moment. I think the challenge with COVID is being able to live them, right? I might value charity, for example, but if I'm struggling to make ends meet, how can I live this value in the COVID situation? So that, I think, becomes a little bit of a further stretch and why people feel this some bit of frustration around not being able to live their values.
Okay, so that kind of leads me to flip the script. We talked about senior leadership. As employees that are listening in, and you're struggling at this time, how can I tie into this? Is it realistic that I can tie into, being in this full of life mindset?
I think, as we started off, right, I said there's always an engagement pandemic before the COVID pandemic.
Okay.
So it's definitely something that's relevant. What might happen, and that's the surprise, if we take full of life to organization, maybe 20% of that organization might quit, right? Because they might realize that something that makes them fulfilled is not what they're doing today.
Yeah.
It's not what they're doing today. So, and that's a real risk. We start with a disclaimer in our book saying, watch out, this book can really change your life if you go through the process as it's intended to. Now, that's not our intention that 20% of people leave, but in some organizations, maybe that's a good thing. That brings in fresh blood. Or people possibly, they move roles. So they realize that their passion is in another area, because one aspect of the 3-step model is also knowing what do you want, right? What do you really want to do? What are you really passionate about? What do you love to do, which you would do even if no one paid you, right? And that's the aspect that I think organizations can really bring in, even for employees. And we saw that, Ron, even with Air Arabia. One of the things, going back to your first question of what did I see that worked very well in these tough times, is employees taking on multiple hats. We had people from different departments pitching in to departments that really needed help, right? That includes, and that's we did jobs that we wouldn't imagine you would have done. So we went really, they say, outside your box or outside your job description. And I could see that really happening with employees.
So if someone is sitting now listening to this and they're sending out resumes all over the place, can we tie something in for them to possibly give them hope or to move towards this fatalistic view that they see?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, this concept of full of life, it ties in a lot to Maslow's hierarchy and lots of the other motivational theories. So it does depend where you are, what stage in life you're at. So let's say there are people looking for a job, but they have some basic level of financial security, some basic level of social status, and so on. Then the concept is very much relevant. In fact, this forced break can often be the much needed thing for them to really discover who they are, because you have that time to go for courses, do online assessments. If you only look up, let's say, online free disc assessment or free self-assessment, free career assessments, there's so many companies giving these out. So it's a great time to, if you are looking for a job and if you have the financial security in place, to really look at who am I? What are my strengths, my talents? What do I stand out for in all the years that I've worked? Second, to really look at what do I really want? What am I passionate about? What would I work? Since I don't have a job, where would I work without any money and still feel good about it because I have some financial security in place. So I think it's really relevant, and it's about and that's the reboot, right? It's about looking at the situation differently. An external situation is out of your hand, but what you do in that situation is in your control. So that's what I would say in terms of how the book applies to people who are in a much dire situation and they're looking for jobs and they're sending out CVs. I think reflect really, who are you? What do you really want? And then just make a plan to get there. And I think you will come out far better out of this than how you feel right now.
I told someone in the discussion the other night, I said, stop looking for a job. Stop it. I said, start looking for something that you want to do and you bring your skills along. And they thought that was a powerful statement, but if you try and live your next version of you like that, this whole job concept where you hate, in our cases, we hate Saturday night to deal with Sunday morning, and make it more realistic than something that you really, really want to do. So one of the questions I ask when I'm in front of a group, how many of you can relate? Now, this is the US audience. This is a kind of our version of Middle East. I said TGIS, which means thank God it's Sunday. We all know what TGIF means, and everybody is happy to get away. But are you that excited about going in, on that first day of the week? That's always been kind of my driver in doing that. And at this stage, I enjoy Saturday night because I can't wait for Sunday morning to come about. Do you kind of feel that way sometimes?
Absolutely, Ron. And I think this is the unfortunately, a very small percentage of people, right? And I hear it all the time when I'm working these past 14 years. Oh man, it's the weekend, hooray. Or there's even a greeting, happy weekend, right? But what about happy work day or happy Sunday in our case, or happy Monday, right? And sitting here, it might sound like a cliche, but you've seen it. What you're talking about, I can relate to. I've seen people who are like this, who are really looking forward to coming back to work. And I think that's what this time of COVID, where business is a bit slow, so you have more time, it gets you to reflect on, what do I really want to do? Where can I make a contribution rather than just looking for a job?
So would you say what you're talking about, full of life, is that possibly could be saying this is an antidote to the rest of your life? If you get this portion correct.
Well, I wish it was that straightforward. I think we repeatedly say, yes, it could be the starting point of an antidote, but not the antidote for the rest of your life, because it's a whole journey. So if people really get the concept, even our model, we say it's completely shifting all the time, right? It's moving. So if someone read the book a year ago when it was launched, probably their circle and their assessment, because on our website, we have a full of life assessment. You can answer some questions and quickly find out how full of life are you today? Which aspects of your life need a little bit of a push or need a little bit of a brush up? And this is going to situationally keep changing. So instead of saying, here's the model, it's a one size fits all success model. No, unfortunately, it isn't, because it's also a coaching book. So to each individual, the model needs to be applied a bit differently. To each individual, depending on where they are in their whole life's journey, things could apply differently. So some of the ideas we have for our future is to write full of life for engineers, full of life for CEOs, full of life for millennials, because really the first book just sets the base. But how to apply it is really very, very specific to each person based on what they do, where they are in their life, and so on.
So what's the website? Can you give us the website for people listening in that want to go there and take it?
Sure. It's easy to remember. It's fulloflifebooks.com.
Okay, Full of Life Books, one word.
Yes, fulloflifebooks.com, one word. Yeah.
Okay. I read a survey, Gallup survey, and it said that this globally, 15% of workers look forward to going in on that Monday concept. So they call it Sunday night. This is the US version, Sunday night to Monday. It said they call it Sunday night angst, ANGST.
Yeah.
We all go through it, but they say what you should watch is the time that kicks in. Does it kick in at 7 o'clock on the Sunday evening? Does it click in at 4 o'clock, noon, or when you wake up in the morning on Sunday and you're feeling that, you know, your body is telling you that something's not right. So why don't we act? I mean, we know Sunday night is tough, or in our case, Saturday night may be tough. Why wouldn't we just kind of say, I need to do something differently?
True, I think, and that's a big challenge, right? There's lots of things that, so we started with self-awareness, Ron, and this is an example where someone is self-aware, but they don't do anything about it, right? Yeah. And that's, I think this is a good way for me to connect to the third piece of the model. So we've spoken about self-awareness, which is who are you? We've looked at passion and engagement in terms of what do you want? The third piece in the puzzle is how do you get there, right? Which is about, there are people who are really self-aware and they also are very passionate about what they do. However, what's missing is they don't necessarily have a plan, a vision, or a milestones of how do they get to what do they want. So this is a great example of that. I know I feel this angst, right? I know if I don't feel it, I can bring all my strengths back to work, or I might feel a Monday morning blue or a Sunday morning blue, right? As they say, right? So what am I going to do about it? So how do you get there is the missing piece. So, and this, I wish there was a one size fits all answer to this, right? To say just
you could just a magic wand and you just go across and it's all done, right?
I wish that was the case, but I think if I can relate it back to the book and the model, it's about the first two steps. If you really know who you are and what your strengths are and what your talents are and what you value, and you also know what you want, and what you want is what you're going to on a Sunday, then getting rid of this angst is almost automatic, right? Because you really feel passionate about going to work. You really feel passionate about the value that you add at work. And we also say it's all right if you don't, right? It's not just go through this and say, now I need to quit or I need to start doing what I love to do. Right? That's not what we're saying.
Yeah.
And being HR, of course, I can't say that. So, so it's really about sometimes just having a quick reboot. And that's what our e-learning is about. It's about saying, what's influencing me today on a Sunday or on the previous day? What negative influences are affecting my mindset? And then once I'm aware of this mindset, what habits can I include? And we introduce 4 happiness habits in the book and in the reboot section. And we give people this 28-day challenge. You know, to all the listeners, I'd love to share this with you. So when we send you some of the free resources after this, take on this 28-day challenge. So starting today, which is 6th of September, for the next 28 days, implement these ideas one day at a time, and you would see this difference. I can almost guarantee the Sunday angst being eliminated. But how it's done is going to be very different, Ron, for you. It's going to be different for me and for each of our listeners.
Yeah. So my journey was kind of self-learning. I know I had a job at one time, and in the Sunday night angst, mine was Saturday morning. I got up on Saturday morning and was hating the day because I knew that when I went to bed that night, I had to deal with Sunday, and the next day was Monday. And once I became aware of that and the impact it was having, I said, I got to get out of here. And I walked in basically on a Monday morning and quit with no job. And I said, I'll figure it out. And it was, and when I look back on my career, it was probably the best decision I could have ever made. And it all worked out in the end. And I think a lot of people are afraid to make a step, but in the end, if you look back over your life, it always works out, you know, and you can always make adjustments. As you said, it's a journey, you know, going forward. So going forward, what would be your key advice, a key takeaway, strong strategic statement from your book for our listeners?
A strong strategic statement. Wow.
Well, let's say strategic statement. You know, in our business, we know, you know, what can I do? What do I own? Or
yeah, I think to take the 300 odd pages and to concise it into one statement would be read the book. I'm kidding. Okay, Ron. So I think to bring it down into one statement, I would say look at what's missing in your life. Right? We put the statement and say, when you look in the mirror, how fulfilled do you feel? What do you feel is missing? And once you're able to answer this question, what's missing, ask yourself, what are you going to do about it? And that's really what our book is about. It helps people take a real deep look in the mirror, because we're busy going about life. And that's, and that's the tragedy of it, right? You're just going on and on with no time to pause and reflect and think about your own self. And that's really the key takeaway. Take this time to reflect on yourself, have a deep look in the mirror, consider these three questions of who you are, what do you want, and how do you get there, and do something about it. I like your example, Ron, and we quote in the book, we give many stories, because it's not like we are the best and I'm full of life all the time. I wish I was like that. It's not. We've just taken all these people that we met, these wonderful people in workshops, in my coaching sessions, who I see are so full of life. And exactly like you, there's this lady who did exactly this at the peak of her career. The next day she resigned. And the only reason she resigned was she felt something was missing. She asked, is this it? Is this all that there is, in life for me? What more can I do? And those are sort of the provocative questions that when you ask yourself, then things do work out. Absolutely.
Yeah. To give a little flavor to what I just talked about with mine, this was 2008, and this was the height of the financial disaster. So what my game plan was to be back on track within 6 months. Didn't happen for a little over a year, but I learned new skills. I started writing, I started speaking, and one thing kind of morphed off into another. That if I had to plan something out, it would never have worked out with a concrete plan.
Yeah, absolutely. And therefore, I think the key in that, and we speak about this as well, is the courage, right? The courage to take that first step, and often the faith in your own self, right? How much belief do you have that I will make it work? And if you do believe, how much belief do you have on someone looking down on you, that he or she will also make it work for you, along with your own belief to make things work.
Yeah. Ashirvad, thanks so much for enlightening us. Your book is full of life, and our topic was surviving during the COVID period. This will be available on podcasts in a few weeks, and we will follow up on the website to get further information on that. And in the edited version, you will get all of his contact information. But can you give us now your contact information as it relates to possible email address? Or you gave the website already.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best place to reach me in regards to my book is authors@fulloflife.com. That's AUTHORS @fulloflifebooks.com. And that's the easiest way to reach us. Alternatively, you can search on LinkedIn or Facebook, Full of Life Books. We have groups and communities there as well. And as Ron said, just for all the listeners here and for Ron's community of partners and listeners, we're giving away the Reboot e-learning course, a Reboot part of our book and a workbook with no conditions attached, which will hopefully help you survive, and not just survive, thrive in this time of COVID.
Okay, how is that going to work? How are you going to go about giving that away, or can you give us some background?
We have a link, and right now we're not able to show that link. When you edit and share this back, we will share this link with all of the people who are listening. I think we can put it in the edited version. Alternatively, if people write to authors@fulloflifebooks.com and just reference this conversation with you, we're happy to send them the links to the material. The ebook is right now at the e-learning is at the final stage, and we know it will get approved next week and uploaded. So by next week, whoever writes to us at authors@fulloflifebooks.com or signs up, so we will share the link to sign up. Then we will email this back to them, ebook, a workbook, and the e-learning course that will be available at no cost.
Okay, thank you. Ashirvad, thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure having this conversation.
Okay,
Thank
cool.
you.
Cool.